Today, I want to talk about a core concept that we're going to be revisiting over and over and over again this semester, and that's the concept of human governance. Now, I want to start the discussion about human governance by talking about government. When we think about the idea of government, because this is an American government class, what are we talking about? Well, there are two common definitions of the idea of government that you'll frequently see in political science textbooks or sociology textbooks, things like that. One definition is that government is the legitimate exercise of power to manage human behavior. A different definition of government that is also commonly found is it's an organization or agency authorized to exercise that power. So when we talk about government, it's often useful to clarify what we mean when we're talking about the term. Because these are two quite different ideas, right? And in fact, they're different parts of speech, right? If you look at this from a grammar standpoint, definition one is a verb and definition two is a noun. Definition one conveys a process by which something occurs. Definition two communicates an entity that does definition one. They're related to each other, obviously, but they're different. And it's useful for us to think about these two differences. So in the course, we're going to think about governance as a central organizing concept. And governance is really close to definition one. Governance is a process by which human behavior is controlled or managed. Governance, that process, occurs through institutions, procedural institutions, such as rules or organizations, such as rules, and formal institutions, which are like organizations. So again, we have two different definitions of institutions here. This derives out of political science literature. A procedural institution is the rules that we use to do something. We all agree we're going to abide by these rules. Formal institutions are organizations or agencies, like Congress or the presidency. So governments, the way that we might think about them, if I ask you about the government, we're normally thinking about Congress or the presidency or something like that, or the state house, the state legislature, or the governor in Lansing. That's what we usually mean when we're talking about the government. But government governs, right? So, and that governing is what we're going to talk about as being governance, right? It's the process. This might seem like splitting hairs to you, or kind of maybe I'm really developing this in too much detail, but these are really important different concepts, because governance occurs all the time, and it doesn't always involve the government. Right, so governance is the idea that human behavior is managed or controlled. The government is this entity that does some of that. But most governance actually does not involve the government at all. So it's important to understand that there are some parts of your life that have nothing to do with the government, but they still involve or entail some degree of governance. So let's look at this in a little bit more. When we think about every society for which we have any kind of a record organizes itself, right? There's some kind of an organizing principle that takes place in every society. Every society that we've ever known about, since the earliest documentation or records that we have or evidence that we have about human society from its very earliest eons. Every society organizes itself somehow. And part of that organizing is making rules. Right? Every society has rules for behavior. You know, one of my favorite classes in my Intro to Political Science class, back when I was a freshman in college, we read this book called The Forest People, which was written by an anthropologist. And he was basically talking about this really primitive tribe in the darkest darkest jungle of South America. And he was talking about this particular tribe, and even observing this extremely small, extremely primitive from our perspective tribe, they had rules for how their members were expected to behave. Right? So every society has this, and every society always has. It's pursuing, society itself is trying to pursue goals, and even if these aren't expressly stated, most societies have this as expressive goals. They want to perpetuate the community. Somehow each society has it within its own bones and within its own self, the notion that they want to survive. And then sometimes they have broader goals that the community wants to set and accomplish. But in order to survive, people have to agree to certain rules for behavior. They have to agree, for example, not to kill each other over petty stuff. Right? If everybody kills each other, decides the rule is, I'm going to kill you over a petty disagreement, then the society is just not going to last. Right? So at the very least, we have to agree as any society that we're just not going to go ahead and start killing each other for petty stuff. Right? So that could be a fundamental rule for perpetuating the community. But we want to do more. Most societies want to do more than just survive. They want to thrive in some way. They want to develop in some way, or at least they want to maintain some level of predictability and comfort in their zone, in where they are. And so they want to perpetuate the community over time. This requires cooperation. People have to agree to the rules. Right? And sometimes these rules are very basic and the process is very simple for making it happen. And sometimes it gets more and more complex. And the larger society it is, the more complex these rules get to be. And then achieving community goals, again, the community goals could be really simple. We just want to live in peace. Okay, how do you do that? What does that look like? What would it take for your society just to live in peace and be left alone? Or what if your society has more complex goals, like we want to protect the environment, or we want to expand economically and grow and thrive financially? How are we going to do that? Every society makes these kinds of decisions. Okay? And that's a governance. It's a set of governance principles. So the key questions every society has to deal with is, first, what behaviors of our human beings, the human beings in our community, what behaviors need to be controlled? So agreeing not to kill each other as a general principle is a behavior that needs to be controlled. The natural instinct we might have to kill somebody as a result of some kind of an offense, we all got to agree, all right, take a breath, we're not going to do that. Okay, so everybody has to agree to certain kinds of behaviors. And it doesn't take too long, we can think about behaviors that we want to be controlled in order to have society be perpetuated and to thrive. Second question, once you have the rules, who gets to enforce the rules? Who gets to encourage people to obey the rules? And who has the power to punish people for violating the rules? So we have to think about behaviors we want to control, and we have to think about who has the authority to control the behavior. And control takes two pieces. One is to encourage people to obey and comply with the rules, and the other is to punish people who violate the rules. Every society has to manage this. Third question is, when you have somebody with legitimate authority to manage certain kinds of behavior, what are the tools that we're going to give to that agency or that entity to enforce the rules? So it's not enough just to say we don't want people to kill each other. We don't want rape. We don't want stealing. We don't want environmental degradation. That's nice. Those are good rules, right? Who has the authority to encourage people to obey or punish them for violating those rules? And what kinds of tools do they have at their disposal for making that happen? Because I can stand up here and wag my finger at you, but if there's no penalty, there's not really much of a disincentive for you to stop doing the bad behavior. Right? So somebody's got to have power and legitimate authority to enforce the rules. Now, the bigger your society, as I said, the more complex your society, the more people you're talking about, the more complex these rules have to be. The more difficult it is for a community to kind of make decisions collectively. So in small towns, you could have the agreement, all right, we're not going to allow our cows to eat all the grass in front of the town hall. But at some point, somebody's got to say, how are we going to enforce that rule? Right? And then, if the person continues to break the rule, then how are we going to punish them? The more complex you are, the more difficult it is to do. So it requires more complex procedures. Questions? So far, so good? It's pretty straightforward, like Anthropology 101, basic social format. So we can think through different institutions that have control over different aspects of society. So we have this chart that might be helpful for you to do a landscape version on your notebook. You have 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of content, and then 3 columns. If we look at most human societies, they have some component of each of these institutions. Some more complex, some more simple, but every society has them. And throughout human history and throughout human cultures, there are some common threads that we can see. Now I'm playing kind of fast and loose with the definition of institutions by including individuals in there, but they fit into the category for the purposes of this discussion. So when we think about individuals, each of you has authority over yourself, right? You think about this in terms of what your day has looked like so far, what it took to get here. How many of you set an alarm? Right? How many of you got up right away when the first time the alarm went off? More power to you. How many of you hit snooze? All right. Self-governance. Nobody forced you to set the alarm. I didn't email you last night reminding you, don't forget to set your alarm. Right? Some of you exercise self-control by getting up in the first alarm. And some of you said, well, I'm going to be kind of flexible with myself. I don't have to be quite so strict. Right? I don't have to get up exactly at 6. I can get up, 6:07 is good enough, or 6:14, or whatever it ends up being. Okay? So individuals exercise authority over themselves. And you have authority over your life in so many areas. But you understand this intuitively in the sense that if somebody else tried to force you to do something you didn't want to do, what is your natural reaction? You have normal self-governance. You get up, you're going to set my alarm. So this morning, I set my alarm for 5 o'clock. Okay? Hit the snooze alarm, didn't get up till 5:20. Okay? If my wife came in and said, you need to get up, it's 5 o'clock, get out of bed, what is my natural reaction? My natural reaction is not, oh, thank you so much for helping me exercise self-control and self-governance. My natural reaction is, shut up. Not that I would say that. Don't say shut up to your wives. Each individual has authority over him or herself. We resist and resent it when somebody else tries to exercise authority over us in something that we believe we should have autonomy over. My wife's trying to get me to eat better. And whenever I want to eat something bad, she gives me that look. And she says, don't eat that. Or when I go up for seconds, she's like, do you really need a second helping? Really? Okay, she's trying to encourage me to self-governance, but I resist it. I resent it. I might comply. I might say, yeah, I don't really need a second helping. But I'm not stinking happy about it, right? Because what has she done? She has stepped into my realm of authority. I have authority over me. I'm an autonomous, independent, thoughtful human being. I can do whatever I please. Right? And then some other individual who has authority over her life gets in my chili. Right? Starts telling me what to do, and I resent it. Because this is my space. Think about it when anybody tells you something that you naturally believe you ought to have autonomy over, and how much you resist and resent somebody telling you what you can and can't do. When they've got no business telling you what you can and can't do. All right. You're an individual. You have authority over certain aspects of your behavior, and you resent it when other people butt in. Everybody's like that. The second institution in every society is the family. Family is a fundamental building block. It's biological in nature, right? There's natural authority that comes from being a parent. Natural authority. I created these little kids. I have the natural authority to manage their lives. I can tell them what to do. This weekend, we spent time developing the chore charts. Anybody grow up with chore charts? Love them, don't you? Right? You know why we don't like chore charts? It's because somebody else telling us what we need to do with our lives. But in the family, there's a bigger picture than just the individual, right? There's a collective element, right? And so in families, there's natural authority that extends to other family members, and particularly with the parents, right? Parents, from a natural standpoint, parents have natural authority over the kids to manage the family. But what happens if I start to say, well, I've got to manage over this tribe, I'm going to go next door and start telling people what they ought to do. How they ought to be raising their kids. How's that going to go over? Imagine your parents or whoever raised you, somebody coming in completely unrelated, start telling your parents, your grandparents, whoever raised you, how they're supposed to raise you. How does that go? Does it go well or does it go poorly? Think about the person in charge of your family growing up. What's their reaction? Oh, well, you're right. I really ought to be doing it. No, they're like, you have no authority here. Right? Limited jurisdiction. My authority to manage kids does not extend beyond my property. It does not extend to somebody else's kids. Now, can they delegate that authority to me? Of course. Yeah. But on my own, I can't just have that authority. So family as a building block in every society has authority over its own family members and not other family members. Now let's be clear, when I'm talking about family, I'm talking about a biological unit, people, or a legal unit, people join together. This is going to take all kinds of different perspectives. All kinds of different families exist across cultures, right? In the United States, historically, our culture has been mom, dad, kids, right? But in a lot of cultures, this extends out to grandparents, aunts and uncles. That's part of the natural governing structure of the family, right? So the definition of what is family can vary from culture to culture, but every culture has the basic building block. Okay. As you start to get into more complex cultures, you start to have different kinds of organizations, like voluntary organizations. People sort themselves out into different groups, like clubs. Historically, what this has looked like is churches, synagogues, mosques, fraternities, sororities, universities. We choose to join together with other people on some other basis. And so a member of this voluntary organization, and the authority of that organization is over its group members. So there's a Western Code of Conduct, right? Which you probably are all familiar with, right? You read it every day, make sure, I gotta make sure I comply with the rules of my group, right? The Western Code of Conduct does not apply at K College. Those are not our people. We are our people. We chose to be here. We volunteered to be here and to sit under this particular code of conduct. If we wanted a different code of conduct, we should find a different organization. Right? Nobody's forcing you. You make the choice. So our group members are under authority in this group, and the authority of our group does not extend to other groups. Sensing a theme here, right? Each institution has authority over a designated subgroup of individuals within a society. The authority of that subgroup does not usually or naturally extend to other similar entities. Right? Trying to take an academic sorority and trying to get them to impose their rules, or get them to take those rules and apply them on a social fraternity, completely different animals, right? The rules are not going to transfer. It's a different group of people choosing to affiliate with each other. One important subset of this are labor and economic relationships. Right? In our culture, in our economy, you have employment at will. You can go get a job, they can choose to hire you or not. You can choose to quit or work. They can choose to reward you or not. It's completely voluntary. There's nobody telling you you have to go work here in America. There's no employer saying you have to hire this person. It doesn't work that way. It's completely voluntary. But the rules of that behavior, such as how much you're going to be paid, what your hours are, what the productivity expectations are of that, apply only to the people in that company. They don't apply anywhere else. So when I was in college, I worked at Chi-Chi's restaurant, and I worked for a little Mediterranean snack bar. I worked over the college. In my college years, I worked at a lot of restaurants. Right? The rules changed from restaurant to restaurant. Right? Because just because Chi-Chi's had authority over this area of my life that I personally agreed to, does not mean when I went to go work at Tapas that I had the same set of expectations and they had the same set of rules. They paid better. So I left Chi-Chi's and I went to work someplace that paid better. I voluntarily chose that. If I don't act the way that I'm supposed to act, if I don't produce the way I'm supposed to produce, then they are perfectly within their rights to get rid of me. I volunteer to work for them. They volunteer to hire me. It's completely at will. We agree on a negotiated price for my labor. And as a result, I agree to do a certain thing. And if I fail to do that thing, then I lose the job. Right? That's the nature of the beast. Finally, we've got civil government. Again, more complex society, because most communities, even small communities, have some form of civil government. That is an entity or an authority that's vested in some people to exercise authority over other people. Okay? But the civil government of one society has authority only over the residents and citizens of that geographic unit. If one civil government decides they want to exercise authority over a people that are currently governed by another civil government, what does that end up in? What does that look like? One civil government says, you know what, we want to govern you. In addition to us, we want to govern you. What happens? Not rhetorical question. What happens? War. Right? Why do people fight us stuff like that? It's because, no, these are our people, and you have no authority to come over here to our territory and start trying to rule us. That causes war. So all of these things happen at every level of society, from the individual on up. The jurisdiction of each of these institutions is limited. On top of that, have you ever, do you know people who vape? You know somebody who vapes. So in the news yesterday was Gretchen Whitmer's plan to make it illegal to sell flavored vaping fluids. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but, right? And some people are like, well, yeah. And other people are like, wait a minute, who is she to tell me that I can or can't have flavored vaping fluids? Right? A resentment at this level of authority imposing its will when the person might see this is about me. About 10 years ago, here at Western, there was a big discussion on campus and a big vote about whether or not we were going to allow smoking on campus. The decision to smoke, individual, right? Individual, right? But at some point, the people in this voluntary organization called Western Michigan University voted to ban tobacco on campus. And so now we have those lovely, welcoming signs on all the entry points on campus, right? Tobacco-free campus. Some people were not very happy about this. So this was held by a vote by the community campus. Let me tell you about political power, right? Who smokes? What's that? Individuals smoke. But who are those people? Can we look at them and say there's some kind of a common element in them? Do you know who tends to smoke? Less educated people. You know who doesn't smoke? Better educated people. Better educated you are, the less likely it is you're going to smoke, regardless of what you might see in pop culture. Better educated people, higher income people, don't tend to smoke. People who do smoke, people who are less educated, lower income. So guess what happened at Western? They had an election. And overwhelmingly, the well-educated, higher income people voted to restrict the smoking freedom of the people who smoke, who tend to be less educated and have lower income. That's how this works. So then this entity imposed its will on individuals who are making their own personal choices. And so they justify it in what kind of way? Well, it's not good for them. It's not good for the community, it's not good for them. So we're going to discourage it. That's the way this government stuff works. So now, going back to the previous concept. We not only have behaviors we want to manage, different institutions in society that have different levels of authority over different groups of people and limited jurisdiction, there are different tools that we're willing to give these institutions. And not every institution has every tool at their disposal, every method of imposing their will. Thinking about the alarm clock example, your method of governance is self-discipline. All right, you go to bed, you say, no, really, I'm going to get when it goes off the first time today because I've got homework to do before class. I got to do this reading. I'm going to get up. How many of you have ever gotten up extra early one morning to complete an assignment that was due, or pulled an all-nighter, right, because you had an assignment that, right, we've all been there, right? That's an issue of self-discipline. Okay? Family members have a certain set of tools at their disposal. They can use social pressure, don't embarrass me, moral authority, I'm the daddy, that's why. Don't question my authority, I'm here, God put me here, shut up. Do what I tell you to do. Corporal punishment, I'm going to spank you. Okay? Now, none of these are completely unlimited. Right? There's a boundary on the parents in terms of that authority. And the bigger you get, so now I have adult children. 4 of my 6 kids are now adults. And, I'm bigger than, and 3 of them are bigger than me. Okay, so I can no longer use corporal punishment as a tool for getting them to behave. So instead I use social pressure or moral authority. But even so, they're adults, they're autonomous individuals, they're more living here. And so I'm hoping that I raise them in a way that they exercise self-discipline instead of being embarrassed to do so. Voluntary organizations use membership rules. They also use social pressure. Okay. They also use moral authority, particularly churches. God put me in authority over you, over this congregation. I have the right to tell you what to do. Labor relations, behaviors managed by the hiring process. You agree to be working, they agree to hire you, they agree to pay you, and you can be promoted for doing a great job, or you can be fired for doing a lousy job. And then civil government, though, is the big granddaddy of them all, because civil government is the only one with the authority to deprive you long-term of your personal freedom. If I lock my kids, chain them to the bed, I have gone beyond what is legitimate in terms of my exercise of my authority. And we hear on the news periodically about parents who do this, right? And they're always charged by the civil government of violating some kind of a crime. Child abuse, child neglect, something like that, right? But when the government does it, it's legitimate. They are allowed to imprison people for violating the rules of the community. They're allowed to put people to death. None of these other institutions have the authority to put people to death in most cultures. They can take away my stuff. They can take away my money, they can take away my car, they can take away my house. Right? They can do this by making me pay extra money, by garnishing my wages, by forcing me to pay taxes and punishing me if I don't pay those taxes. Right? It's a unique institution. So what we're going to be talking about in this class, most of the time, is this institution managing the behavior of residents and citizens using these tools. But I think it's important to frame the whole discussion with the notion of human governance generally. Because governance does not usually mean the government. Most of the ways that your behavior is shaped on a day-to-day basis is not based on the rules set by the government. Most of the time, the legitimate authority in your life is yourself as an autonomous individual. Your family members, because you might have some responsibilities to family. The groups to which you voluntarily belong, like the Western Michigan University community. Your boss at your job, whether you're delivering pizzas or teaching for a university, or making cereal boxes over in Battle Creek. Okay? Your behaviors are shaped by those relationships in those contexts, and then there's some stuff that's managed by the government. So it's important for us to understand that most human governance does not take place by a government. It takes place in other institutions. Questions? Great. Make sure you take your pieces of paper that you've been doing the thought exercises, give them to Davis on the way out. Have a fantastic weekend. Don't forget to do quiz 1, and I will see you on Tuesday. Today, I want to talk about a core concept that we're going to be revisiting over and over and over again this semester, and that's the concept of human governance.